I've got to tell you something right off the bat, and I am fired up about what happened yesterday on Capitol Hill. Like, genuinely fired up in the best possible way. So, here's the deal. If you've been following the news at all over the past few weeks, you probably saw some pretty inflammatory headlines from the Washington Post about VA disability benefits. Headlines that basically painted millions of disabled veterans as scammers and freeloaders. Headlines that made it seem like the entire VA disability system is just the broken honor system that's being exploited left and right. And I'm not going to lie to you. When I first saw those articles, my stomach dropped because I work with veterans every single day. I see the real struggles. I see the legitimate service connected conditions. I see people who sacrifice their bodies, their mental health, their entire futures for this country. And to see them all painted with this broad brush of fraud and deception, it hurt. I mean, it hurt a lot of people. But yesterday, October 29th, 2025, something incredible happened. The Senate Committee on the Veterans Affairs held a hearing, and what unfolded over those hours was nothing short of a complete dismantling of that false narrative. The VA Inspector General, the GAO, veteran service organizations, senators from both parties, they all came together and said, no, enough. This is not true. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because this isn't just some political theater. This matters to every single one of you watching this video. Whether you're currently going through the claims process, whether you're thinking about filing, whether you've been rated for years, this hearing just defended your benefits, your legitimacy, your honor. So stick with me. We're going to break down exactly what happened, why it matters, and what this means for your future as a disabled veteran. All right, so let me set the stage here. Let's talk about what sparked all of this. On October 6th, 2025, the Washington Post dropped this massive investigative series. And when I say massive, I mean they went all in. They analyzed 25 years of VA disability claim data. They filed for Freedom of Information Act lawsuits against the VA and the Department of Justice. They got surveillance videos. They interviewed dozens of officials. This was a huge undertaking. What was the headline? Veteran Affairs Disability Benefits Program is prone to exploitation. The subtitle was even more direct. Military veterans are swamping the US government with dubious disability claims. Now, look, I'm going to be fair here. The article did document some real cases of fraud. There was a guy who faked being paralyzed from MS for 3 years. There was a 71-year-old veteran who pretended to be blind for over 30 years. There were pilots with disabilities who didn't report their conditions to the FAA like they were legally required to. Listen, these things will happen and they do happen. They are documented, they are real. But here's where it went off the rails. The Post took these extreme outlier cases, and I'm talking maybe 70 fraud prosecutions since 2017 out of nearly the 7 million disabled veterans, and they used them to paint the entire system as broken. They questioned whether conditions like tinnitus, sleep apnea, PTSD, and even diabetes should qualify as legitimate service-connected disabilities. Think about that for a second. Tinnitus, the number one service-connected disability for veterans, something that literally millions of veterans deal with every single day because of exposure to gunfire, explosions, aircraft engines, you name it. The Post questioned whether that should even count. Now, PTSD, one of the signature wounds of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, they questioned that too. And it gets worse. The article actually suggested the VA's disability program had ballooned to $193 billion annually because veterans were gaming the system. They implied that the PACT Act, the law that finally gave veterans exposed to burn pits at Agent Orange the presumptive service connections they deserved, they implied that that was just making the problem worse. The reaction from the veteran community was immediate and it was intense. The disabled American veterans called it shameful. Paralyzed Veterans of America said they were disgusted. Even the VFW called out the Post for making veterans look like freeloaders. Individual veterans wrote letters to the editor saying, "This report is hurting me." You know what? It did hurt because when you're a veteran who's actually dealing with these service-connected disabilities, when you're the guy who can't sleep through the night because of combat nightmares, when you're the woman whose knees are shot from working hundreds of miles in full gear, and when you're dealing with the invisible wounds that nobody can see, but that affect every single aspect of your life, to be lumped in with actual fraudsters, that is devastating. So that's the context. That's what led to yesterday's hearing. The Senate Veterans Affairs Committee saw what was happening and they said, we need to get to the truth here. So yesterday, October 29th at 4 p.m. Eastern, the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs held this hearing. The title was Putting Veterans First, Is the Current VA Disability System keeping its promise. And right away, you could tell this wasn't going to be your typical Washington hearing where everybody's reading prepared statements and nobody's really listening. The chairman, Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas, a Republican, and the ranking member, Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut, which was a Democrat, they came out swinging in the defense of veterans. It was bipartisan from the jump. Senator Blumenthal, in his opening statement, basically tore apart the Washington Post premise. He said, and I'm quoting here, these articles fail to understand the purpose of the benefit. They cherry picked anecdotes to wrongly claim that disability benefits is fraught with widespread fraud. He went on to say, we need to root out wrongdoing, not abandon a system deserved by our heroes. Now, let's talk about who testified, because this is important. This wasn't just a bunch of politicians talking to each other. They brought in the heavy hitters. First, there was Cheryl Mason, the VA Inspector General. This is the person whose job is literally to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse in the VA system. If anybody would know about widespread fraud, it would be her. And you know what she said? She said, and again, I'm quoting, there is no massive fraud going on. I take issue with the Washington Post story. She went further and said, I find it reprehensible for any person or entity to suggest that many veterans are hustling or scamming to get benefits. Think about that. The top fraud investigator for the VA is calling out the Washington Post for misrepresenting the scale of the problem. Second, Elizabeth Curda from the Government Accountability Office, or the GAO. These are the people who audit federal programs. She testified about the actual numbers, the actual processes, and backed up what the Inspector General was saying. Third, we're representatives from the major veteran service organizations like the VSOs. We're talking about John Retzer from the Disabled American Veterans, Carl Blake from Paralyzed Veterans of America, Ryan Gallucci from Veterans of Foreign Wars. These are the organizations that represent millions of disabled veterans. These are the people who help veterans file claims every single day. These are the boots on the ground of the VA disability system. And they came up with receipts. They came with data. They came with the truth. John Retzer from DAV pointed out that the fraud cases the Post highlighted represent just a tiny fraction of the 6.9 million disabled veterans claims that are completely legitimate. He talked about how these claims were approved based on federal laws, regulations, and processes with actual medical evidence. Carl Blake from Paralyzed Veterans of America said something that really hit me. He said, as a veteran with real combat-related service-connected conditions that occurred while serving with the 82nd Airborne, I do not begrudge veterans for seeking benefits and services which they have earned and are entitled to by law. That right there, that is what this is really about. This is not charity. This is not welfare. This is not the government being our savior. It is a contract. When you raise your right hand and swear to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, the government makes a promise to you. If you get hurt, whether physically or mentally, while fulfilling that contract, we will take care of you. Ryan Gallucci from the VFW absolutely destroyed the false narrative. He said, recently, the Washington Post has smeared America's veterans as freeloaders, insinuating that their hard-earned benefits are too generous and are part of a system plagued by fraud. They talk about the cost of veterans' health care as if it were some line item to be trimmed, rather than a moral obligation of a nation that has been at war for a quarter of a century. And then he pointed out something even more crucial. What truly drives bad behavior is not veterans, it's bad policy. If you want to crack down on exploitation, start with the real predators, the claim sharks, who charge illegal fees, falsify paperwork, and profit from veterans' confusion and pain. That is the real issue, folks. It's not that folks are scamming the system, it's that there are predators out there, these claim sharks, nexus mills, that are shady consultants who promise to get you a higher rating for a fee. Those are the people exploiting the system. Those are the people the VA needs to crack down on. So let's break down the specific arguments that came out of this hearing, because this is where it really gets educational for you as veterans going through this process yourself. Argument number one, the Washington Post fundamentally misunderstood what a VA disability compensation is for. The Post kept focusing on whether veterans with disabilities could hold full-time jobs. They kept saying things like, how can someone with tinnitus be considered disabled? Or this veteran has PTSD but still works, so why are they getting disability pay? But here's what they missed, and what every witness at a hearing emphasized that day. VA disability compensation isn't unemployment insurance. It's not about whether you can work. It's about compensating you for the decrease in your quality of life, your earning capacity, and your overall functionality because of injuries or illnesses that are connected to your military service. Let me give you an example. Say you're a veteran with chronic low back pain from years of humping gear in combat zones. Maybe you could still work. Maybe you've got an office job. Maybe you're pushing through the pain. But you can't play with your kids the way you used to. You can't go hiking on the weekends like you used to like to. You wake up every morning stiff and sore. You need regular pain management. Your sleep is disrupted. That affects your entire life, not just your employment. That's what VA disability compensation recognizes. It's not about whether you're employed, it's about the impact on your life. Argument number two, the fraud cases highlighted by the Post are statistically insignificant. The Inspector General made this crystal clear. Yes, there are fraud cases. Yes, they do prosecute them, but we're talking about 70 prosecutions since 2017 out of nearly 7 million disabled veterans receiving benefits. Do the math. That is 0.001% of recipients. Even if you assume there are unreported fraud cases, and the Inspector General said they actively investigate suspicious patterns, you're still talking about a fraction of a percent. The vast, overwhelming majority of claims are legitimate. Compared to that, so I want you to actually compare that to Medicare fraud, where estimates are 3 to 10% of fraudulent filings, and tax fraud, where the tax gap is estimated at 15% of what's owed. The VA disability system, by contrast, has one of the lowest fraud rates of any federal program. Argument number three, the Post ignored the impact of the PACT Act and why it was necessary. Here's something the Washington Post really messed up on. They looked at the increase in disability claims and disability spending over the past few years and suggested it was because of fraud or because veterans were suddenly claiming conditions that weren't really service connected. But that completely ignores what actually happened. In 2022, Congress passed the PACT Act, the most expansive, significant VA benefit law in decades. This law added presumptive service connection for veterans exposed to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan, Agent Orange in Vietnam, radiation exposure, Gulf War illness, and more. What does presumptive even mean? It means that if you serve in certain locations during certain time periods and you have certain conditions, the VA will presume that they are service connected, meaning you don't have to prove causation. The government says, we know these exposures happened. We know these health effects are linked to them. You shouldn't have to fight us on this. This is huge. This was what veterans had been fighting for decades for. Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange had been denied for years until the government finally acknowledged the connection. Gulf War veterans with mysterious illnesses were told it was all in their heads. Post 9/11 veterans breathing in burn pit smoke every single day were having their respiratory and cancer claims denied. The PACT Act finally fixed that. And yes, it increased claims, and yes, it increased costs, but because we were finally taking care of veterans who had been wrongly denied for years. Senator Tammy Duckworth, who is also a disabled Army veteran herself, who lost both legs in Iraq, she made this point beautifully in the hearing. She said that veterans shouldn't be stereotyped as moochers for filing legitimate claims for recognized conditions. Argument number four, the real problems are systemic, not fraud related. You know what everybody actually agreed on in the hearing? That the VA disability systems has problems, but they're not fraud problems, they're process problems. The system is still too slow. Veterans still wait months for decisions on claims. The backlog, while it is improved, is still too high. Claims processors are understaffed. The rules are still complex. The forms are confusing. And you know what makes that even worse? The government shutdown that was happening during this hearing. Multiple witnesses pointed out that the shutdown was affecting VA claims processors, making it harder for VSOs to access regional offices, creating more delays for veterans. That's where the focus should be, not on demonizing veterans for filing claims, not on questioning whether tinnitus or PTSD are real disabilities, but on making the system faster, more efficient, more transparent, and more supportive of veterans navigating it. Argument number five, the real predators are the claim sharks and nexus letter mills, not veterans. This came up over and over again in the testimony. The VFW's Ryan Gallucci really hammered this point home. There are organizations and individuals out there who prey on veterans. They promise to get you a higher disability rating in exchange for fees, sometimes illegal fees. They falsify your paperwork. They coach veterans to exaggerate symptoms. They profit off of veterans' confusion and desperation. Those are the bad actors. Those are the people the VA Inspector General is going after with fraud alerts and investigations. And honestly, as someone who works in this space, I see this all the time. Veterans will come to us at Xterra Health and tell us about some consultant who promised them a 100% rating or a $5,000 upfront fee. Or they'll show us a letter from a company that says, We will guarantee that you'll get your benefits or your money back, which, by the way, is illegal. These are operations that are exploiting the system, not the veterans themselves. All right, so we've talked about what happened. We've talked about why it matters on a national level. Now, let's all bring it home. What does this hearing mean for you as a veteran? First, your claims are legitimate. If you have a service connected disability, if you have filed a claim in good faith, if you provided medical evidence and went through the proper process, your claim is legitimate, period. You are not a fraudster. You are not gaming the system. You earn those benefits through your service and sacrifice. So don't let articles like the Washington Post make you feel guilty or hesitant about claiming what you're entitled to. The Senate, the VA Inspector General, the VSOs, they all affirmed yesterday that the overwhelming majority of disabled veterans are doing exactly what they should be doing. Second, if you're thinking about filing a claim, don't let the controversy stop you. I worry that some veterans saw those headlines and thought, I don't want to be seen as a scammer. Maybe I just won't file. Please don't do that to yourself. If you have a service connected condition, you have every right to file. That's what the system is there for. The hearing made it clear that Congress and the VA wants veterans to access the benefits they've earned. They don't want you to be discouraged. They want you to get help. Third, be aware of the real threats to the system. This hearing wasn't saying everything is perfect. It was saying the Washington Post misidentified the problem. The real threats are claim sharks and predatory organizations that charge illegal fees, complex processes that confuse veterans and delay claims, understaffing in the VA that creates backlogs, proposals that to means test benefits or cuts funding. Senator Blumenthal specifically called out OMB Director Russell Vought for suggesting means testing for VA disability benefits. That means making your benefits dependent on your income or assets, treating it like welfare instead of compensation you earn. That's the kind of thing we need to be vigilant about. Fourth, continue working with legitimate VSOs and advocates. One of the most powerful moments in the hearing was when Paralyzed Veterans of America pointed out that the Washington Post didn't interview a single VSO for their article. Not one. They wrote this massive investigation into the VA disability system and never talked to the organizations that help millions of veterans navigate it every year. That tells you something. The VSOs, the DAV, VFW, PVA, American Legion, all of them, they know the system inside and out. They represent veterans for free. They're accredited by the VA. They testified under oath about the legitimacy of the system. Work with them. Work with legitimate advocates like us at Xterra Health. Don't go fly-by-night operations promising guaranteed results for huge fees. Fifth, stay informed about the proposed changes to the system. Remember, we're still waiting on these proposed changes to mental health, sleep apnea, and tinnitus ratings that I've talked about in previous videos. Those are still expected by late 2025. The hearing didn't address those specifically, but it reinforced that any changes should be about making the system better for veterans, not about cutting costs by reducing ratings. We need to make sure that as those proposed changes come out, they're evaluated fairly. The mental health changes, for example, could actually be positive, focusing more on symptom severity rather than occupational impact. But the sleep apnea changes could be devastating for a lot of veterans. We need to stay engaged, submit comments during the public comment period, and make our voices heard. Six, understand the political landscape. This hearing was bipartisan, which is great, but we're also in an environment where there's pressure to cut federal spending across the board. The Trump administration has promised not to cut veteran benefits, and DOJ has largely spared the VA from these deep cuts. But we can't be complacent. Veterans benefits cost money, and I mean $193 billion. And that is a lot, but it's less than 3% of the federal budget. And it's not charity, it's a cost of war. If we're going to send troops into combat for 25 years straight, we have a moral obligation to take care of them when they come home. That was the resounding message from the hearing today. Finally, take pride in your service and your status as a disabled veteran. I know that sounds simple, but I mean it. There's been so much negativity in the media lately, so many articles questioning your legitimacy, your motives, your honesty. Yesterday's hearing was a powerful rebuke to all of that. You served, you sacrificed, you earned these benefits, so take pride in that. So let me bring this home. Yesterday was a good day. Not a perfect day. The VA disability system still has real challenges that need to be addressed. But it was a good day because the truth came out. Because the people in positions of power and authority stood up and said, no, we're not going to let this false narrative stand. Senator Blumenthal summed it up perfectly when he said, we need to root out wrongdoing, not abandon a system deserved by our heroes. That's exactly right. Yes, we need to prosecute fraud. Yes, we need to investigate suspicious patterns. Yes, crack down on claim sharks and predators. But don't you dare question the legitimacy of millions of disabled veterans who did nothing wrong except serve their country and then ask for the benefits they've earned. The VA Inspector General, the person whose entire job is to find fraud, said there is no massive fraud problem. The VSOs, who represent millions of veterans, provided data showing that the fraud rate is a tiny fraction of just 1%. The GAO confirmed the oversight processes are working. Senators from both parties defended the system, and all of this happened during a government shutdown that was literally affecting VA operations in real time. The hearing had to go on despite the shutdown because this was important. So, what do I want you to take away from this? One, your benefits are legitimate. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Two, if you have a service connection condition and you haven't filed, file today. Don't leave benefits on the table because of bad press. Three, work with legitimate accredited representatives. The VSOs are free. Xterra Health and other reputable advocates are there to help you. Avoid anyone promising guaranteed results for big fees. Four, stay engaged with proposed rating changes. Comment when the VA asks for public input. Make your voice heard. Five, be vigilant about threats to benefits, meaning means testing proposals, funding cuts, misleading media narratives. The veteran community needs to stick together and push back on these things. Six, share accurate information. That's why I make these videos. That's why I'm breaking down this hearing to you, because too many veterans get their information from sensationalized headlines instead of the actual facts. So if this video helped you understand what really happened at that hearing, if it gave you some peace of mind about your claims, if it educated you about the real state of the VA disability system, do me a favor, share it. Send it to a veteran buddy who might be worried about these issues. Post it in your veteran Facebook group. Get accurate information out there. And of course, if you need help with your VA disability claim, if you're stuck in the process, if you want someone who actually knows what they're doing and who's on your side, check out Xterra Health. Visit us at xterrahealth.com in the comments below. We're here to help navigate this process for you and get the benefits you've earned. No BS, no false promises, just real expertise and real support. I'm Dr. Marshall Barr. Thank you for your service. Thank you for watching. You remember, yesterday, the truth was won. The system was defended and your benefits are legitimate. I'll see you in the next video. So stay strong. Until next time, stay mission ready.